Talking with Jordan, with Peterson. So, there's been a lot of talk. Two things have happened recently. One is the Douglas Murray Smith kind of debate appearance on Rogan, which caused a big stir on the right. And an ongoing has been like a feature of James Lindsay and I think Kissin, I forget his family name, talking quite a bit about what James Lindsay has defined as the woke right. The woke right being the right that is engaged in cancel culture, that's engaged in being very, very, very intolerant of any other views. Also, a woke right that is embraced identity politics, that is racist, anti-Semitic, a woke right that is kind of mindless, tribal, and kind of embracing Trump, almost everything he does. So, or thinks Trump is too moderate. It certainly doesn't embrace his support of Israel, for example. So Lindsay has identified this idea of woke right. I mean, everything that he's identified is stuff we know, and I've been talking about since the alt-right days of 2016. And now Jordan Peterson has come in and trying to discuss who one should platform, who Joe Rogan should take on as guest, which was part of the controversy around what Douglas Murray had to say. He also got into discussion of the characteristics of this woke right. So what I want to do is show you, I think it's about a minute, between a minute and 2 minutes of Peterson's appearance on Joe Rogan, and then read you some stuff that Peterson has written about this, and then I want to comment on it, and we'll kind of go from there. And there's other people commenting on the commenting, but it's interesting. It's just interesting how they're phrasing it, and how they're orienting it, and what they're blaming for it. And I think it's interesting. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can get Jordan on here. There's Jordan in the middle of a thought, as you can see. Let's play Jordan, and be tall. You guys have heard Jordan Peterson before, so.
You also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation.
He's talking to Joe Rogan.
And the issue is, how do you identify the psychopathic pretenders? And it's even worse now, and then make a barrier.
So note right off the bat that he's talking about psychopathic, right? The psychopathic. So he is identifying what Lindsay calls a woke right with a psychological problem, the psychopaths who've invaded the right. So he's dealing with the issue from a psychological perspective, and I want to we'll come back to that and whether that is appropriate.
Right. Now, the right was calling for the left to do that for decades, right, and they didn't, and they couldn't, and the left is not good at drawing barriers.
So it's about drawing a barrier and not letting them in, not being associated with them, not platforming them, right? And this is all the question of, do you have Nazi sympathizers on the Joe Rogan show? Is that appropriate? And I think Peterson is being nice to Joe Rogan by saying, we need to set barriers. We can't just let everybody in because then they taint us. And he's absolutely right. I mean, he's absolutely right by this. What I find interesting is the way he characterizes them. I don't think Joe gets it. Joe's not. I don't get a sense that Joe's very smart, but Joe doesn't really get it. But Sadia, how do we separate ourselves from the psychopaths?
Partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what because I've been watching these right-wing They're not right-wing. These psychopathic types manipulate the edge of the conservative movement for their own gain.
Right.
And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guise. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well,
but
particularly now.
yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so, you know, you've let your curiosity guide you, your curiosity and your desire for knowledge, this quest, you've let that guide you as a podcaster. And by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly the same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for?
Like, you know, this is the Jordan Peterson I like, I have to admit. This is the thoughtful Jordan Peterson. This is a Jordan Peterson to kind of thinking out a problem aloud. It's Jordan Peterson, you know, what he's saying here is, look, the really crazy people around us, they're associated in some way with our movement, with our ideas, but they're crazy, and we don't want to be associated with them. In other words, Jordan Peterson here is struggling with the question of sanction, the question with objectivism. We've talked about a lot for, you know, at least since the 80s, but really Ayn Rand talks about this, the sanction of the victim. She talks about sanction all the time. How do we not sanction people who appear like us but are crazy? Crazy in Jordan Peterson's terms, psychopaths. How do we set the criteria? On the one hand, we want to ask questions. On the one hand, we want to learn. We want to hear from them. We want to hear from people. We want to get a wide array of views and points of view. But how do we limit that to not include the psychopaths? And that is a really good question. Now, I don't categorize him as a psychopath. He does. But that's a really good question. And I agree with Jordan, particularly for somebody like Joe Rogan, but generally for interviewers. It's not an easy one to answer, particularly as we start being suspicious of the motivations or the honesty of many people who present themselves as experts. How do we know who is legit and who is not, who adds value and who does not? And how do we know when we're sanctioning something that's so evil that it does us damage? I think Rogan interviewing Ian Carroll is a sanction of ideas that I think Joe Rogan, at the end of the day, well, maybe, is better than. Joe is very mixed. There's a section of this, I won't play it for you, but where he talks about Jews, and he buys into so many of the tropes. He buys into so much of the kind of anti-Semitic implications that he's even affected a little bit. So Jordan is trying to figure this out.
Do you have a conceptual system worked out for that? Like, because
and it's kind of funny because he's asking Joe Rogan if you have a conceptual system worked out for that. And you get a sense that Joe Rogan doesn't have a conceptual system worked out for anything. He's not that. He's not an intellectual. He doesn't think this through. He's not conceptual. In particular, he strikes people as honest, and he asks good questions, and he prods and pokes and stuff like that. But I don't think conceptual is the right. So Joe Rogan has no answer for this, and they go off on a different tangent from there. But I think what's interesting here, what I really want to get out of this is, A, that he's asking an interesting question, the right question. I don't think he has quite the answer, because I think he's thinking about the problem wrongly. And as part of that, I want to read to you what he wrote on Twitter, in the context of kind of James Lindsay's woke right and woke left kind of analysis. This is what Jordan Peterson wrote. He wrote, "It's not woke right and woke left, a la James Lindsay, although his diagnosis is not far off. He's off target, however, because it's not political. The problem is deeper than political, nearer the psychological, bordering on the metaphysical. Right? And then he goes on and says, it's not right versus left, red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat, or conservative versus liberal. It's cluster B psychopaths, dark tetrad personalities against everyone, including themselves. Manipulative language aimed at self-serving ends. Narcissism, the desire to gain reputational status without competence or effort, and predatory parasitism, otherwise known as psychopathy. And to top it all off, sadism, positive delight in the unnecessary suffering of others. And, and he goes on about 10 markers of political psychopathology and the rest of it. And I mean, I find this really interesting. I've known, I've known psychologists and I've known economists and I've known a psychologist who told me once, yeah, it's all psychology. If we could just get people to have the right psychology, they would adopt the right philosophy. And in a sense, it's all about psychology. Everything can be explained in social psychology. And then I knew an economist who basically his perspective was, people are never going to grasp objectivism until they grasp economics, until they understand free market economics. If everybody understood how free markets worked, everybody would be pro-free markets. The barrier is not philosophical, it's economic understanding. They just don't get economics. They don't understand economics. We need to do a better job to teach them economics. And both of these most of them consider themselves objectivists, so they understood ideas. They understood at least that ideas were there, that philosophy was there. And you're seeing it here. I think Jordan Peterson is absolutely right that the problem we're seeing on the right and on the left, kind of these crazy people on the right and the left. I call them crazy, but they're not crazy. These evil people, these really nasty people on the left and on the right. That it is not just political, and that the problem is deeper. It's deeper than political. But when Jordan thinks deeper than political, he goes to psychology. And then he says bordering on metaphysics, but I don't know what he means by metaphysics. I worry about what he means by metaphysical. Metaphysics is a little mystical, and it's hard to understand what he exactly means by that. So I'm going to leave that aside. But he goes to psychology when it's deeper, and I'm going to say it's deeper. It is deeper. And it is metaphysical and indeed epistemological. The problem is ideological. And one of the, one of the elements I want to include here, this is Hannah Cox, who's, a capitalist, and she's pretty good. And she writes about a lot of these issues, and she writes in response to kind of Jordan Peterson, she writes, the right has a grifter problem and has been getting played by disingenuous actors who care about nothing but their own bottom line and who will say and do anything to advance themselves and who are often degenerates behind the scenes. So this is, again, kind of a psychological, but this is like, no, they're really just crooks. They're just trying to make money out of it. And here's the thing about all these explanations. One is they're not getting to the root of the problem because they don't want to get to the root of the problem. Because there's a sense, and this is particularly with for Jordan, the root of the problem is ideological. The root of the problem is, as he said, metaphysical. The root of the problem is philosophical. It's the ideas that these people hold. Some of them are grifters, no question. There's some crooks and grifters and just, but most of it is a corrupt metaphysics and epistemology. And and this is the problem. The problem is that the entire political spectrum, everybody pretty much on the right and the left, suffer from real philosophical flaws, real philosophical problems. Basically, collectivism and some form of subjectivism / mysticism. They all suffer from the same thing. From the woke left all the way through the center, all the way to the woke right. Now, some people in the center are a little bit less collectivist, but fundamentally, the conservative movement is a collectivistic movement and always has been. The national movement is a collectivistic movement. The religious movement is a collectivistic movement. The socialist movement is a collectivistic movement. So the movements from which these, call them extreme manifestations, manifest, all share a basic philosophy. And that all these extreme players are doing is taking those philosophies to an extreme. They're saying, okay, you want to be a collectivist? Let's really be a collectivist. You want to be a mystic? Like, we all are mystics, right? We all believe in God, Christ is King, all this stuff, religion stuff. Then, yeah, let's go all out. And, Candace Owens is just all out. Now, you could say she's just crazy. Or you could say she's a really manifestation of the ideas that are prevalent and dominant in the culture on both left and right. A distrust of reason, a distrust of our senses, a distrust of any kind of expertise, science, knowledge, a distrust of knowledge, a commitment to revelation, a commitment to ancient books. I mean, those are all ideas that are on the right. They're not ideas on the crazy right, and they're ideas on the left. They're ideas that were taught at universities and schools. They're ideas in the culture. They're ideas that I think, unfortunately, often, Jordan himself lends to those kind of interpretations. If you devalue reason, as our culture has, both left and right, what you're going to get is crazy people. People who think they have truth revealed to them. People who think that any interpretation is legit. The left and the right have adopted at various degrees and various forms kind of a postmodernist, subjectivist, tinged with mystical perspective on the world. And that's what explains the crazies on the right and the crazies on the left. Not that they're crazy. Not that, I think Jordan's perspective is, look, in every society, there's like 4 or 5% who are psychopaths, and those 4 or 5% are going to gravitate to the extremes, and they can take advantage of those extremes, and they can grift off of those extremes, and they're just the psychopaths of the 4 or 5%. But that I think lets the culture off the hook. That lets him off the hook. That lets the conservative movement off the hook. But the reality is the conservative movement and the center-left movement, the left that's a liberal in America, the liberal movement, have made all this possible. And they made it all possible by advocating for milder versions, inconsistent versions of, I think, what ultimately are pretty crazy ideas. Ideas that are inconsistent with reality, inconsistent with reason, and inconsistent with individualism. And these ideas are always people who take them more seriously. There's always people on the right and on the left that are going to take them more seriously. I mean, Pat Buchanan was saying a lot of the stuff that Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens are saying, or MAGA is saying. He said it a long time ago. Now it's getting worse. It's getting worse not because the number of psychopaths is growing. It's getting worse because the culture is declining. The culture is descending. And therefore, respect for reason is in the decline. Respect for individualism, even in America, the land of individualism, is in decline. And as individualism declines, as reason declines, as freedom declines, more and more people become nutty, hold nutty ideas. What keeps us sane is reason, is our connection to reality. Now, part of the sense that they're all over the place, you know, you can name tons of them, right, is social media that brings them to our doorstep or to our computer and puts their crap right in front of us and we can't really avoid it. But they've always been around. There's just now more of them, and there are more people following them, partially because of our modern communication networks, but more importantly, because every decade, our educational system gets, worse. Every decade, we become more subjectivist. The right becomes more mystical. We become less connected to reality, less dedicated to reason. And once you detach from reason, individualism cannot survive. I mean, this will be part of my talk on Tuesday, what the Enlightenment gives us. Basically, what the fundamental value of the Enlightenment is reason. And when we move away from that, we move towards the ideas that lead to disaster. I mean, Marx is a move away from reason. Hitler and Mussolini are moves away from reason. And as a consequence, once you move away from reason, collectivism is inevitable. And the appeal of collectivism becomes inevitable. And it's taken a long, long time in America because America was so grounded in the ideas of reason and therefore individualism and therefore political liberty. After 250 years of people chipping away at it intellectually, philosophically, it's finally here. And as on the right, religion becomes stronger, and on the left, pure emotionalist subjectivism becomes dominant or stronger, tribalism is inevitable because the more those epistemological methods become dominant, the more we're detached from reality, the more afraid we become, the more the world becomes scary, the more we can't understand it, the more we look for mystical or conspiratorial explanations for it, and the more we huddle in tribes in order to appease or reduce our fear. Tribalism is a response to fear, to panic, to confusion, to not being able to take care of yourself, not knowing how to take care of yourself, not having the tools and not trusting the tools that make it possible for you to take care of yourself, not trusting your own mind. Ultimately, tribalism is a consequence of the undermining of the individual's capacity to reason. And that's the philosophical cause. That's why we're seeing such a big woke right. That's why we're seeing MAGA be so successful. And it's not an accident that MAGA overlaps dramatically with religiosity. And it's not an accident that even the crazy part of MAGA are the ones that have, Christ is King all over their profile, right? Their religiosity leads them in that direction. Religion is the biggest conspiracy theory ever. Religion is the biggest deceit ever. And religion teaches us a form of knowledge that opens us up to any BS that anybody might spout. So Candace Owens wrote something about, I think in response to Jordan Peterson, she wrote something about re-upping, this crucial conversation about Christ as King. And Jordan Peterson replies, Candace Owens, a truly farcical, and here means the Farsis, from the Farsis, who he considers, pretenders, not real religionists, a pretender. She vociferously proclaims the devotion to Christ for no other reason than to elevate her perceived status. Her outrage is designed not to shout the truth from the rooftops, build bridges to make peace, but to subvert Christianity itself with its new force to her own purposes. She is literally using God's name in vain. There are few more unforgivable sins. But no, this is exactly not the case. Yes, she is rejecting Christianity as you see it. But there is a long tradition of Christianity as Candace sees it. Indeed, I would argue a much longer tradition of Christianity as Candace sees it than a Christianity as Jordan Peterson sees it. Indeed, she is using the name of Christ as Christians have used the name of Christ for hundreds of years, and used it for hundreds of years before the Enlightenment. It was only the Enlightenment, and really before the Enlightenment, it's only the bringing in of reason and Aristotle into Christianity that kind of maybe marginalized the Candace Owens of the time, or maybe I don't think they even marginalized it, but made them less prevalent. Made them less prevalent. So no, this is the problem. The problem is Candace is just another Christian. But Christianity rests on a foundation of revelation and of interpretation of ancient books. Who's to say her interpretation is not better than Jordan's? What objective parameters? I mean, Jordan's smarter than Candace, but okay. But what do we measure these revelations against? Reality? How do we know what reality is? The problem with mysticism is, can't prove it one way or the other. You can be a better theologian or worse theologian, but who cares? And often the emotionalists won the day within Christianity. Anyway, so I think this is an interesting debate. And I think it's a mistake to view somebody like Candace Owens as just a grifter. Candace Owens is what happens when you take your ideas, conservatives, seriously, consistently. Yeah, to an extreme, but that extreme is consistency. And this is what happens when you abandon objective reality, you abandon reason and objective truth. So Candace Owens should not be viewed as some grifter who's just trying to make money. No. And she represents a huge consistency. Just look at how many people follow her. Millions. She's incredibly successful. I think a grifter means somebody who's coming in and cynically taking advantage of the situation. Like Candace doesn't really hold these views. She's just coming in to make money, and maybe she holds the views because they make her money and it's easy for her to convince herself. But in that sense, they're all grifters. Right? Anyway, it's an ideological battle, not a psychological one, not a battle against grifters, but ideological. All right, that's what I have to say today about Jordan Peterson and this issue. There's a lot more to say about it, and there's a lot more that we can return to. And it is interesting. The rise of MAGA, the tribalism, the rise of tribalism, the rise of these characters on the right who are particularly vicious and horrible. It's going to be a topic that's going to be with us for a while because it's not going away. It's not going away. and it's going to be an issue, and it's going to, in many respects, I think it's going to get worse, because the corrective measure is not on the right. Is not, let's abandon the mysticism, collectivism that led to us to this. Let's try to find the guardrails, what's acceptable collectivism and what's not acceptable collectivism. Guardrails between what's acceptable mysticism and what's not acceptable mysticism. And that's not the right approach. It's not the right approach.